So this follow-up video is a lot sooner than I expected it to be. And in my video yesterday going over Lareo's awakening, I said that I would do a video on him again, testing him in reports and comparing him against some of the alternative picks for Bleed Infantry formations to see exactly how he compares to them. Because despite being a free-to-play commander, the way he mathed out and historically how Merrill functions at very high levels, you saw even the likes of BDR running quite a lot of Merrill Bleed and Inf Cav and AC seasons in the past, just as an example of how strong that ability is. And I went into detail in the previous video about how Lareo typically just makes that ability even better because you're not diluting crit and bleed strength. Because if you're running Merrill, you're probably going to be an Inf Cav. Whereas if you're running Lareo, you're going to be running full Inf. And because of that, all those additional troop numbers will have Lareo, in those practical situations at least, hitting harder than Merrill typically would have in similar situations in the past. So I went into this wanting to compare Lareo to the likes of Patelo, Andrea, Latz, that sort of mid-spender tier of commander, and seeing exactly how stacked up against them. So I ran a series of tests. You see here I unequipped weapons from all test subject commanders just to keep it consistent. And that might need to be a bit of a disclaimer for some of the conclusions that will be drawn out of this, because Lareo, of course, doesn't have his weapon released in-game. So if you have, say, Latz with weapon, that will, relative to these tests, perform better than she'd currently compare to Lareo, just because you can boost her 4-star ability beyond what you can currently boost Lareo's 4-star ability to be. So I did a series of tests. I ran 3 hits each. Every single hit is against a weakness lineup, so there is no RNG from Sinara procs or Layla procs and stuff like that. And because Lareo has spear health reduction, makes hitting spears slightly biased towards him, I did some hits against infantry as well. So if I go back to my spreadsheet on this, I won't overly linger on all the details about his awakening or anything because that was all covered in the previous video. And I'm just going to cover the comparisons. You have here 3 reports for Patelo. Latz, Sinara, Rhea, and Kevin remain consistent, and then just 2 in this case reports for Lareo in that spot. The reason there's just 2, I will make clear. One thing to note with this is there is potentially a synergy bias here towards Patelo, because of course Patelo's 4-star synergizes with healing, which Latz is going to be providing, and it's Latz with weapon as well. So this is actually the ideal spot for Patelo. You're not going to be maximizing his effectiveness any more than this. And even still, if we look at the troops we kill in each of these situations, first of all, you see it's, in this first comparison, about 20k more troops killed by Lareo. In the second, it is about 44k more troops killed by Lareo. And again, in this third Patelo report, it's significantly less. Again, as you can see there, 437k to 478k up there. It isn't as big of a difference as the kills alone suggest, because of course Patelo's 4-star, there is a damage reduction component to it, which Lareo does not have. So there are, through that, less casualties on your own side with Patelo, but it isn't enough to actually make Patelo perform better. So you see here in this comparison, there's 40k more kills, but there's about 20k less deaths. So it's still a 20k swing better for Lareo. And again, up here, in this case, Lareo actually has less deaths and more kills. Less deaths is probably just from killing the enemies quicker, so they have less to damage into you. But there is a bit of a trend, and there will be a trend throughout this, of Patelo and potential other options causing less casualties on your own side. But there is a clear trend throughout this that Lareo actually tests better than Patelo, and by quite a significant margin too, particularly for damage output. In regards to the damage output, when I was theory crafting it out, I said that there would be on average 15 crits and 15 bleeds per fight when you account for the total numbers of attacks by the 50% chance. when you actually look through reports and go all the way through them, I went over a few reports there. I just counted every single time there was a crit, and of course with Rhea, every time there's a crit, there'll be a bleed. So in this first report I did that for, there was 12, and in the second report I did this for, there was 17 total crits, and then 17 total bleeds as well. So this means that it doesn't proc off Sinara normals, as expected, but you will be getting about, on average, 15 crits and 15 bleeds every single fight. So whilst it doesn't synergize with Sinara, ironically, this will synergize in ways that potentially something like Patelo can't, because if you're running a mid-spender bleed build, you will have, ideally, the bleed increased dragon skill by 10%. You might have the casino skins, which is a bit more premium, but that can increase bleed damage even further as well. And if we're looking at even higher budgets, although this is fairly unrealistic, more bleeds can potentially mean something like more Daeron damage, because Daeron does an extra 150% damage coefficient to every target that's bleeded. But Lareo both has more raw value through his 4-star ability, but he also synergizes with parts of the build a lot better than something like Patelo does. And the fact it tests better than Patelo, this isn't something I tested in here, but it will test better than Andrea as well. Andrea is in a very similar spot as Patelo. When I've tested it historically, they were pretty much neck and neck. I'm very, very slightly edged Patelo. But if Lareo is outperforming Patelo, he will outperform Andrea as well. And the next one I compared, which was a bit optimistic when I went into it, I didn't think it would compare to this, was actually against Latz. And again, you will see a consistent trend of, despite having the lower attack stats, Lareo consistently kills a bit more than the Latz compositions do. See there, it's 11k more kills between these two. It is about 9k more kills between these two, and then just 1k kills more between these two up here. But Latz was consistently having significantly lower casualties. So on face value here, I think they're about equal, which in itself was surprising to me. I didn't expect Lareo to be that good. But again, something you have to note is Patelo was in these tests, and Patelo is exaggerating Latz's healing effectiveness because he provides damage reduction when healing is applied. So if you remove that synergy out of the equation, I would expect Lareo to actually slightly outperform Latz as well, if you have all the synergy components there to exaggerate Lareo's actual 4-star ability, which for a free-to-play commander is fairly crazy, to be honest. And then down here I just had a few more tests to compare the same things but against infantry, just to invalidate Lareo's spear health reduction. You can see even without that, Lareo's still killing here 23k more than Patelo was. Slightly more casualties, but the net swing is still in Lareo's favor there. So as an overall conclusion from this, I think that Lareo is actually potentially the best non-F5 bleed commander at this point for bleed infantry, which feels very wrong to say, but the testing supports it. That is in a vacuum without weapons, as I said earlier. So here, for example, something like Kevin with 4-star weapon, Lareo will not be better than that. That's so much synergy and so much damage reduction, particularly against something like weakness. And Lareo will suffer a bit just because his weapon isn't released yet. But comparing against something like Patelo, that isn't a debate currently, since Patelo doesn't have his weapon released, and you would imagine given Rhea and Salma's weapons, he will be locked into spear base attack as well. Latz's weapon is so annoying to get, very few people even have it, so again, I'm not sure that will be very relevant to most people, and Drea's the same. But at this point, if I was advising a mid-spender bleed priority list, you obviously need the Sinara and Rhea. Past that point, I think until you're dealing with John, Daeron, Sandor, Night King, with weapons not in the equation, I think Lareo is actually the best commander to slot into this formation if it's mono infantry. If you have Kevin weapon at 2, 3, 4 stars, that has to go above him. If you have Latz weapon at even base, I think that very slightly edges him. But past that, I definitely think he's just slightly ahead of Patelo and Andrea. and then nothing else really compares to them below that anyway. So he definitely makes your 5. I think there's even questions that can and potentially probably should be slotting into a 5 if you're running even 1 or maybe 2 F5s as well.